You want to believe the worst monsters are strangers, right? You want to think they wait in the dark. I think this case proves they're closer than we dare imagine. In 2016, Joel Guy Sr. and his wife Lisa were about to retire, a happy new start. But on November 26th, the Thanksgiving weekend, they vanished from their Knoxville, Tennessee home. Lisa's co-worker called a few days later, worried sick. What police found inside wasn't a kidnapping or a simple murder. It was a horror show. It was a full-scale plan for dissolution and disposal, all detailed by the killer himself in a chilling book of premeditation. He didn't just kill them. He planned to make them disappear for a $500,000 payout. That killer? Their own son, Joel Michael Guy Jr. Now that's a truth that chills you to the bone. When a case hits the news, the victims often shrink down to a few cold facts: name, age, address. You forget they were people with jobs, big plans, and all the messy human ties that bind us. My job is to remind you of that. Before they became a headline for one of the most stomach-turning crimes in modern memory, Joel and Lisa Guy were just a normal, middle-class couple in Knoxville, Tennessee, looking forward to the quiet life. They weren't famous, they weren't flashy. They were a salt-of-the-earth people who worked hard and loved their family. Joel Michael Guy Sr. was 61 years old. He made a steady living as a pipeline engineering designer. Lisa Guy was 55. She was a rock in the local corporate world, working as a human resources accounts payable administrator at Jacobs Engineering in Oak Ridge. You don't get a job like that without being organized, reliable, and deeply committed. In fact, a court later heard that Lisa was so dependable, her supervisor believed her sudden absence from work was highly unusual. They'd spent their lives building something, and in 2016, they were ready to enjoy it. They had sold their Knoxville house on Golden View Lane. They had bought a more modest family home in Burgonsville, Tennessee, and were planning to retire there. Think about that. The relief, the pride, the plans they must have been making over dinner. Their final day in that Knoxville house was set for December 13th. Lisa had even given notice at work. Her last day was due to be December 2nd. But there was a financial thread tied to their lives that they couldn't quite cut. His name was Joel Michael Guy Jr., their 28-year-old son. My take on this is simple. The Guys were almost certainly too kind for their own good. Joel Jr. was a grown man who had been coasting through life. He hadn't had a proper job outside of one brief internship, and despite attending Louisiana State University, LSU, he was what's called a non-matriculating graduate student, meaning he wasn't even in a degree program. He just lived in his Baton Rouge apartment taking classes with his mother, Lisa, covering all his living expenses. The court record shows huge payments coming out of Joel Sr.'s account for the son's utility and school expenses at LSU, including a $10,000 payment to his apartment complex. Lisa even admitted to a sister-in-law that she'd taken a job just so she could continue sending money to him. This financial arrangement, born out of love, was about to end. And that, you'll find, is where the trouble started. The victims had been quietly telling close family and friends that the gravy train was stopping. Lisa told her supervisor that because of the retirement plans, she could no longer support Joel Jr. Joel Sr.'s sister testified that he planned to break the news to the son at Christmas. Joel Jr. would be responsible for his own bills. One half-sister, Michelle Dennison Tyler, heard from her father and Lisa that Joel Jr. would need to find work because they were cutting him off. Lisa was quite clear on the topic, telling another daughter that it was time for the defendant to stand on his own 2 feet. They had built a good life. They were good people. They gave everything they had to their son, including a measure of future security. You see, Lisa had a $500,000 life insurance policy through her employer. She had designated the payout to be split evenly between Joel Sr. and Joel Jr. The plan to retire, the plan to cut him off, and the insurance policy. These three simple facts created a perfect storm. The loving parents who had spent their retirement money on a new home were suddenly faced with the burden of an adult son who wouldn't launch. And Joel Jr., who had done nothing but take, was about to hear the word no. He wasn't going to accept that. My take is he saw a path to getting all the money at once, and to him, the solution wasn't getting a job, it was wiping the slate clean, literally and figuratively.
The whole nightmare starts, as so many great American tragedies do, with Thanksgiving dinner. The date was Thursday, November 24, 2016. The setting was the guy's home on Golden View Lane, Knoxville. Joel Sr. and Lisa were hosting their blended family, Joel Sr.'s 3 daughters, Joel Jr.'s half-sisters, and their families, along with Joel Jr. himself. It should have been a warm, final memory in a home they loved before the big move to Surgoinsville. But something was off, not in a bad way, in a scary, too-good-to-be-true way. You see, Joel Michael Guy Jr. was famously distant. His half-sister, Michelle Dennison Tyler, testified that normally he'd stay hidden in his room, only coming out when he had to. But this Thanksgiving was completely different. The moment she arrived, Joel Jr. was talking to them. He was sociable. He even spent time with her sons, going upstairs to drag down boxes of his old toys and games and giving them away. Tyler found this exchange of gifts odd. He was acting happy, too happy. In hindsight, we know he wasn't being nice. He was performing. He was cementing his image as the polite, grateful son, probably because he already had the notebook in his backpack detailing how he was going to destroy their bodies. The next day, Friday, November 25th, Joel Jr. helped his father move a boat from Knoxville residence to the new house in Surgoinsville. They spoke to relatives that day. Joel Sr.'s sister, Renee Charles, said he told her they planned to leave Surgoinsville and return to Knoxville around 3 p.m. And then, silence. Over the weekend, no one could reach either Joel or Lisa. Phone calls went to voicemail. Texts were unanswered. Shandice Fink, another one of Joel Sr.'s daughters, was particularly worried because Sunday was her birthday and her father always called. But he didn't. Something was definitely wrong. The knock that changed everything. The case finally cracked open on Monday, November 28th. Lisa was due to start work at 7 a.m. She was the accounts payable administrator, remember, organized, dependable. When she wasn't there by 7:15 a.m., her supervisor, Jennifer Whited, started texting. No response. Whited knew Lisa had a big retirement lunch planned that day, and she would never have just blown them off without calling. Whited got worried for Lisa's well-being and did the right thing. She called the police and requested a welfare check. Knox County officers showed up on Golden View Lane. At first, Detective Stephen Ballard just saw an empty house, a sign for sale, and vehicles parked in the driveway. But the caller kept insisting something was not right. Later that day, Detective Jeremy McCord, the lead investigator, arrived with other officers for a second welfare check. This time, the little details screamed danger. They saw bags of groceries scattered right there in the front foyer. They contained perishable items like bacon, sausage, lunch meat, and completely melted ice cream. People put up frozen goods right away, don't they? This was alarming. They noticed the back door missing its doorknob. McCord touched the door and found it was extremely hot. He put his nose to the hole where the doorknob should have been and smelled a weird smell, a chemical cooking. McCord later testified that this was a very unique smell and he could feel heat coming from the back door. The officers found a garage door opener in one of the unlocked vehicles and used it to gain entry. What hit them when the inner door opened wasn't normal. Detective Ballard later said the odor was so strong, "My forehead was burning." Officer Graves felt it too, stating he'd entered the gates of hell.
What they'd just walked into wasn't a crime scene. It was a chemical attempt to erase a crime scene. And you can tell the whole story of this monstrous crime by starting with 3 facts they quickly found. 1. The downstairs thermostat was set to a baffling 90 degrees. 2. The upstairs thermostat, in the most critical zone, was set to 95 degrees. And 3. On the kitchen stove, a large stock pot was boiling. The heat, the cooking smell, the abandoned groceries. The killer wanted the bodies gone fast, but he'd only made the house a pressure cooker of evidence. The horror had just begun to surface. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a crime of passion. What the officers discovered on November 28, 2016, inside the guy's Knoxville home, was the endpoint of cold, careful calculation. The welfare check quickly turned into a horror show, and the facts scream one word: premeditation. The hot and heavy nightmare. Remember those melting groceries by the front door? You think that's bad? The scene only got worse the deeper police went. The heat alone was weaponized. Officers said the house felt like a furnace. Downstairs, the thermostat was set to 90 degrees. Upstairs, it was cranked up to a suffocating 95 degrees. Why the heat? As the killer later explained in his own handwriting, turn heater up as high as it goes, speeds decomposition. The first obvious sign of violence was on the staircase itself, where officers saw reddish-brown staining that looked like blood on the wall, the banister, and a child's safety gate. Upstairs, the chaos was everywhere, but it was an organized chaos. This wasn't a simple rampage, it was a cleanup that had been violently interrupted. In the upstairs hall, police found a pile of clothing that had been cut, along with kitchen knives, drain opener, and sewer line cleaner. In one bedroom, which the defendant later admitted was his, police found a suitcase, textbooks, and the tops to those massive blue storage containers found later. They also found a box of shotgun ammunition. The only sign of life was a dog barking intermittently, which was found locked in the laundry room, a dog his mother, Lisa, would never have locked away. The most horrifying element of this planned disposal was the smell and the source. Detective McCord, having been in the business a while, said when the garage door opened, he felt extreme heat and a smell that is never going to leave me. Ballard said the odor was so strong, his forehead was burning. The disassembly line. The officers followed the heat and the awful smell into the master bathroom. What they found there defies simple description. The shower head was gone, replaced by a garden hose type thing. The room was a mess of plastic sheeting, lights, tools, and knives. Inside 2 large blue bulging Rubbermaid type tubs were the dismembered remains of Joel Sr. and Lisa. These tubs contained their bodies submerged in a caustic, corrosive chemical cocktail intended to dissolve the tissue and bone. Prosecutors, in grim terms, would later call the liquid a diabolical stew of human remains. The forensic details revealed the killer's cold intent. Joel Sr. had been dismembered at the shoulders, hips, and wrists. Lisa had been dismembered at the shoulders and knees. Both bodies had a large gash inflicted after death so the chemicals could seep more quickly into the main cavity and speed up the dissolution. In a separate act of sheer, calculated evil, Joel Sr.'s severed hands were found just down the hall in the exercise room. And that stockpot boiling on the kitchen stove? McCord looked inside. It held Lisa Guy's severed, decapitated head. The pot was so hot and had been heating for so long that the water had a different character than the liquid in the tubs. Autopsies later found that the victims suffered multiple sharp force injuries. Joel Sr. had at least 34 stabs or cuts to his back, and Lisa had at least 25. The wounds to Joel Sr.'s severed hands showed classic signs of defensive injuries, meaning he fought back. The blueprint for murder. Police had the horrific crime scene. Now they needed a motive and a clear link to the son. That proof came when they opened the maroon backpack found in the son's bedroom. Inside was a black notebook. It was no journal,
It was, as prosecutors named it, the Book of Premeditation. The handwritten notes eliminated any possible red herring or argument of temporary insanity. This was a blueprint. The chilling steps included: get killing knives, quiet, multiple. Get carving knives to make small pieces. Bring blender and food grinder, grind meat. Flush chunks down the toilet, not garbage disposal. Use sodium hydroxide to destroy his soft tissue and soften bones for transport. Baste once every hour to accelerate. Sodium hydroxide is lye, a corrosive chemical found at the scene. Turn heaters up to 90 degrees to melt fingerprints and dry everything. Place her phone to send me a text late Sunday to prove that I was in BR and she was alive. But nothing was more damning than the notes on the victim's finances. Under the heading, Her Assets, he wrote, her life insurance, $500,000. With him missing, dead, I get the whole thing. That's the sick reality. The notebook didn't just tell police what happened. It told them why. This wasn't a crime he committed in a sudden rage. This was a business transaction, planned for weeks with his parents' lives as the collateral. You want to know what truly turns a human being into a monster? I think it often comes down to money. It's almost never the passion or the rage that dominates the planning. It's the cold, hard calculus of profit and loss. And that's exactly what the police found in the Book of Premeditation. This notebook wasn't filled with the ravings of a madman. It was a business proposal for murder. The very first thing Joel Michael Jr. Guy Jr. listed after the knives and the blender was an itemized ledger of his parents' wealth. He was keeping a financial scoreboard. You see it right there in the court documents, plain as day. Under the heading for his mother's assets, he listed her $500,000 life insurance policy. But he didn't stop there. He added the chilling, clarifying phrase that stripped away any doubt about his motive. With him missing, dead, I get the whole thing. That's the truth you're dealing with. It's not about love, hate, or a sudden burst of anger. It's about a spreadsheet. It's about entitlement writ large. He wasn't just planning to murder two people. He was executing a financial acquisition. Now, why then? Why Thanksgiving 2016? The answer sadly rests with his parents' generosity finally running dry. As Joel Sr. and Lisa spoke to their friends and family, they made their retirement plans clear. Lisa had told multiple people that once she stopped working, she would no longer be able to bankroll Joel Jr.'s life. This was it. Joel Sr.'s sister remembered him saying they planned to tell their son at Christmas that he need to start paying his own way. Lisa had been even more blunt, saying that it was time for the defendant to stand on his own 2 feet. For a 28-year-old who had never held a real job and whose primary goal was avoiding responsibility, that financial ultimatum wasn't just a conversation, it was a crisis. It was the bomb under the table that pushed him from fantasy to action. He wasn't going to stand on his own 2 feet. He was going to ensure he never had to, by inheriting $500,000 instead.
So once the killings were done, he focused on the cover-up. He spent Saturday and Sunday creating his chemical stew, turning the heat up to 95 degrees and cutting up his victims. But the cuts he sustained during the attack, those defensive wounds from his father, forced him to stop. He needed medical attention for his hands, badly. He claimed he didn't have health insurance, so he drove over 600 miles back to his Baton Rouge apartment to use the LSU Student Health Clinic. He left on Sunday thinking he had set the final traps, the chemical dissolution, the high heat, and an alibi text message timed to descent from his mother's phone later that day. He was now hundreds of miles away, believing his victims were quietly disappearing in a rental home that would soon burn down, erasing any trace. The sheer irony of this case is stunning. Joel Jr. was escaping what he thought was a failing, contaminated crime scene, unknowingly leaving behind the absolute proof of his guilt. A notebook, 2 severed hands, and a boiling pot, all screaming his name right into the faces of the arriving police. He was the quiet monster, and now he was hidden in plain sight, speeding toward his own inevitable arrest. A killer always leaves something behind. It might be DNA, it might be a fingerprint, or sometimes it's something maddeningly simple, like a crumpled piece of paper that gives you a timestamp. You know the who, but you need the undeniable when and how. That's where the investigation flipped. The bloody receipt. The first team of officers had to exit that horrific house fast. The chemical fumes alone were a biohazard, causing a tingling on one officer's forehead. But during that initial rush, they'd gathered a stunning amount of physical evidence, most notably the Book of Premeditation. That notebook told them the son, Joe Michael Guy Jr., was the monster. But the true smoking gun wasn't the notebook itself. It was a simple retail purchase he thought he had cleaned up. In the upstairs bathroom, the one located off the hall, Detective McCord and the other officers found a disturbing scene. A large amount of blood, gray shorts, underwear, and a white t-shirt on the floor. And right there on the sink was a Walmart bag next to a large knife. Inside that bag was a receipt. That receipt was everything. It wasn't for cleaning supplies, it was for first aid. The purchase, made at the Knoxville Walmart, was time-stamped November 26, 2016 at 3:35 p.m. The items listed included 2 bottles of hydrogen peroxide, 2 bottles of isopropyl alcohol, and the tube of triple antibiotic ointment. The unavoidable truth on tape. The team immediately saw the implications. The groceries abandoned in the foyer had a receipt from the same Walmart, dated November 26th at 12:18 p.m. This meant Lisa Guy bought the groceries, was killed shortly after arriving home, where she dropped the bags, and barely 3 hours later, her killer was back at the same store buying supplies to treat his own wounds. Detective McCord did the smart thing. He went to the store and got the surveillance video for the 3:35 p.m. transaction. And there he was, clear as day. The video showed Joel Michael Guy Jr. driving his vehicle to the store. He was buying the items recovered from the upstairs bathroom. And here's the key, the moment where the killer's careful planning broke down completely. His hands were injured. The video clearly showed him with bandages covering severe cuts on his right and left hands. Those wounds weren't from a paper cut. They were later formally stipulated in court to have been sustained during the course of an altercation with his parents. My take is, Joel Sr., the 61-year-old father, fought back hard enough to slash his son's hands, including a deep cut to his left thumb, before being stabbed 34 times. This single video changed the entire case from a hunt to a lockdown. Using the license plate from the video, McCord traced the son's movement. He drove to Baton Rouge on Sunday and then drove back to Knoxville on Monday. Joel Jr. was apparently returning to finish the cleanup, specifically the fire he planned to set. He had intended to use a timer and gasoline containers to burn the house down on Friday, but the timing failed. He returned only to see police cars and yellow crime scene tape. He immediately turned around and drove straight back to Louisiana. The hopelessness was over. The video proved the killer wasn't some unknown monster. The killer was in their car, running, and they knew exactly where he was. The case was now a manhunt for a desperate man. A criminal often thinks about the beginning, the crime, but forgets the endless details of the end. That's where they lose. Once the Walmart video gave police the who, the goal became building an iron cage of evidence, using the killer's own twisted plan against him. The paper trail of greed. The investigation turned into a massive paper and video chase. The Book of Premeditation was the map, but the receipts were the X that marked the spot. First, the DNA. The forensic team didn't need a confession when they had the victim's own tools. A pair of scissors recovered from the top of the stairs told a bloody story. The blade had the blood of Mr. Guy and the defendant, and the handle had Mrs. Guy's blood. Another knife found nearby showed the same pattern. The killer's DNA was also found on pieces of medical tape and gloves in the upstairs bathroom. Even the notebook itself contained the defendant's DNA. This wasn't a struggle with an intruder. This was the son fighting his parents to the death. Next, the police used a license plate recognition software called Vigilant Solutions. This tech tracked Joel Jr.'s blue 2006 Hyundai Sonata. It tracked him driving through Mississippi on Monday, November 28th at 1:05 a.m. and heading back toward Baton Rouge. This confirmed his flight and his attempt to create a massive distance alibi. Following the blueprint. Now the police had to prove that the chemicals and tools found in the house weren't just random items. They were purchased for the specific purpose of murder. The notebook, remember, was a roadmap. It listed the supplies needed, and even mentioned a note regarding the address of an Ace Hardware store in Napoleonville, Louisiana. Police followed this lead, retrieving surveillance footage from that store showing Joel Jr. buying items like muriatic acid and food-grade hydrogen peroxide as early as November 7th. They kept digging. They obtained video footage from a Home Depot in Baton Rouge showing him buying a full arsenal. The final, chilling item. The final piece of physical proof arrived on November 29, 2016. FBI agents and the East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office caught Joel Jr. outside his Baton Rouge apartment complex as he was getting into his car. They got a search warrant for his vehicle. In the floorboard, they found Ziploc bags of pills. Under the floor, near the spare tire, was a second gasoline can. But in the trunk, tucked amongst a metal bowl and other kitchen items, was the most chilling, literal piece of evidence. A meat grinder. This man wrote in his meticulous, sick little book, "Bring blender and food grinder, grind meat, and flush chunks down the toilet." The police found the instrument of his planned final act. This wasn't just proof of the plan, it was proof of his twisted intent to erase his parents completely. The truth is, he almost finished the job, but he got sloppy and he got cut. And that's where the case turned against him.
The handcuffs in the courtroom. They caught him on Tuesday, November 29, 2016. Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI agents, and the East Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office had him under surveillance at his apartment complex in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Joel Michael Guy Jr. walked out to his car, the same one tracked fleeing Knoxville, and was taken into custody. His arrest, just days after the Thanksgiving holiday, stunned people who knew him. You see, he wasn't a violent public threat. He was the quiet student. He was unemployed, 28 years old, and a Louisiana resident who'd been a student there for most of his life. He was the kind of guy who lived in his own bubble, only occasionally visiting his parents. No one outside the family knew the sheer, cold malice lurking beneath that withdrawn exterior. The trial began almost 4 years later, in September 2020. The prosecution didn't need witnesses so much as they needed a hazmat team of forensic experts. They relied entirely on the physical evidence Joel Jr. left behind. The end of the overnight guest. His defense team had one big job: keep the evidence found in the Knoxville house out of court. They argued that the police's entry was illegal because Joel Jr. was an overnight guest and had a constitutional right to privacy in the home. I think that's a perfect example of a killer overthinking the legal side of things. How can you claim the rights of a guest when you've just murdered your hosts? The Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals shut that argument down hard, and here's the logic you need to know. They ruled that even though he was an invited guest, his relationship with his parents disintegrated the moment he attacked and killed them. He no longer had their permission to be there. Therefore, he had no standing to challenge the warrantless search. Beyond that, the court affirmed the police had every right to enter due to exigent circumstances. That overwhelming chemical smell, the high heat, and Lisa's mysterious absence gave them an objectively reasonable basis to believe someone was seriously injured inside. All the evidence he tried to suppress, the knives, the blood-soaked clothes, the chemical-filled tubs, the meat grinder, the bloody first aid receipt, it all came in. Justice finds its way. The prosecution's case was airtight, built on his own cruel words and deeds. They had his literal blueprint for murder and dismemberment, the Book of Premeditation. They had the DNA proving the struggle. They had the video showing the bandaged hands. After only 4 days, the jury found him guilty on all counts. That included 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder, 2 counts of felony murder, 2 counts of abuse of a corpse. The judge imposed life sentences for the murder convictions and added 2 years for each of the abuse of a corpse convictions. In the end, Joel Michael Guy Jr. received a total effective sentence of 2 consecutive life sentences plus 4 years. For the family of Joel and Lisa Guy, a piece of finality was found in those courtroom walls. The generous, kind couple who were simply looking forward to retirement finally had a measure of peace. Their son, the monster they had created and funded, was put away. He's currently locked up in the Northwest Correctional Complex in Tiptonville, Tennessee. If this case shocked you as much as it did me, let us know what you think. Don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with a friend who appreciates true crime. And please leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We'll catch you next time.